guest is Steven Singer. He hates this voter ID law so much that he went online and started a petition. And from the time he started the signon.org, he's got tens of thousands of signatures from people just like him who want this voter ID law overturned. Now, we had a judge just last week who said, that's all valid, the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, and everything's okay. We'll proceed as planned with the November 6th election. Steven, welcome to PCNC's Night Talks.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so when did you first get irate about this voter ID law?
Well, when the law was first enacted, I thought something was funny about it. I thought it smelled wrong, but, you know, everyone has suspicions. But it was in June, really, when State Representative Mike Turzai came on record as saying that the law would allow Governor Romney to take the state of Pennsylvania. Here was someone saying what everyone had been suspecting. So it was out in the open, a smoking gun, if you will. Mm-hmm. That was what really started me. And then I saw there were some election officials who were coming out across the state, in Philadelphia, I think also in Carlisle, saying, you know, we're just not going to enforce this law. And when I read that, I thought, what if that happened across the state? Now, this was before the result of the Commonwealth Court case that we had Wednesday. Mm-hmm. So I was still hopeful that Commonwealth Court would bring an injunction. I'm also still hopeful that the state Supreme Court will strike down the law. But if that doesn't happen, that's where this petition comes in, asking election officials, please, just don't enforce the law.
The Republicans around Pennsylvania, though, have been saying, you know, you guys talk about that Mike Turzai comment, and he was just talking to a bunch of partisans, so he was trying to rally the forces by saying that. He really didn't mean that the whole idea behind voter ID was to have Mitt Romney here and beat Barack Obama.
It doesn't make sense to take it that way. I mean, I think that actually makes it worse. You're talking to, you know, partisans talking to GOP supporters, this law is going to allow Governor Romney to take the state. There should have been shock. There should have been, you know, boos. But instead, there was a round of applause. I mean, this is clearly just another round of voter suppression. And I think, you know, he said it.
Mm-hmm. We'll take your phone calls as well at 412-333-PCNC for Steven Singer on the voter ID law and his sign-on. Is this still up? Your petition is still up on signon.org?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And as far as Judge Simpson last week is concerned, he basically said, following what other states have done, this is pretty much boilerplate stuff, that it's not disenfranchising anyone, it's not a hardship on anyone, just let it go through.
It was very disappointing and shocking, to be honest. I did not think that was going to happen. I think everyone knew that this was going to go to the state Supreme Court, no matter what Judge Simpson ruled. But it was very shocking for him to say that. And it's disappointing because, you know, in Pennsylvania, we have a Republican legislature, we have a Republican governor, and now we have a Republican judge making a very partisan ruling. So it definitely doesn't bolster one's faith in the democratic process.
And the reason that we have this voter ID law is because in 2010, the Republicans took control, we have a Republican governor, and so there's nothing to stand in the way.
Well, I mean, I think the people of Pennsylvania made a mistake in 2010. I think we've been paying for it for the last 2 years with the Governor Corbett's administration. It's been a really tough 2 years. As a school teacher, I can tell you, you know, the $1 billion worth of education cuts, I see the results of that every day. The tax loopholes left enacted, tax cuts for corporations that don't need it. You know, we really need to make a change in November, and voter suppression is not something we need.
But to make a change in November, it has nothing to do with Governor Corbett this time around.
That's true, but the legislature, okay. We still could take back the legislature.
So what kind of feedback then are you getting from the Democrats? Because really, they're the ones who have to rally their troops to get out and overturn this sort of thing. But as long as the Republicans still have the numbers, they don't care.
Well, I mean, there's a large effort out there. There's a large effort out there on many different fronts to fight the voter ID law. Just tonight, in fact, we're having lots of phone banks. MoveOn.org is having phone banks. Penn Action is having lots of phone banks calling people to try to make sure they can get them the proper ID. There's a lot of action out there in a lot of different fronts to fight this.
And as far as the voter ID law, it says in one of the posters that some of you people are holding, voter ID law discriminates against minorities, poor, and the elderly. But are we shortchanging those groups of people by saying, we don't think you're smart enough to go out and get an ID before November 6th to cast a vote. So we're using you to try and and beat this law back. Say, minorities, not just everybody, but minorities in general. We don't think that you have, whether it's the education, the wherewithal to go out and get a voter ID.
In Commonwealth Court, PennDOT testified that 538,000 Pennsylvanians, registered voters, don't have the proper ID. There are people out there that don't. I can tell you, as a teacher, I teach in a district, about 60% of the students there are minority, high poverty district. Very few people drive in that district. They take the buses to get from place to place. And I can tell you, I am positive this law will adversely affect the parents of my students. So there are people out there who this is definitely going to affect hundreds of thousands.
So making it too difficult for them, they're just going to say, I'm not even going to bother.
Without the voter ID law, we don't have people go vote. If we get 50% voter turnout right now without the voter ID law, it's unfortunate that we have voter apathy in this country, but we do. Having another hoop, making it harder for people to vote, in some cases impossible if they don't have the proper documents, is not something we need to do.
These districts, even the district that you teach in, are they high? You say they're high minority districts, so those numbers showed up for President Obama in 2008?
That's what I've read. Yes, that it was. I think Obama got 40% of the white vote in the last election. So it was really minorities that pushed him over the top. And now we have this election cycle. We have all kinds of voter suppression laws to try to make it harder for minorities to vote. It's not a coincidence.
Steven Singer is our guest. His petition is on signon.org. Would you sign it? Do you agree with him? Let's go to the calls at 412-333-PCNC. And Edward in Apollo, good evening. Edward Dean in Apollo, good evening.
Yes, I'm one of the elderly, and I feel that definitely it is not wrong to need a voter ID. Hundreds of people voted in Pittsburgh after they died and went from one precinct to another with no identification and voted. To stir up the minorities, it takes us back to when Lenin said that was one of the ways to take over this country. You should be working equally for everybody, every age group, to have the same thing, and most organizations will see that people get their caller ID free. Why should anybody complain about it?
Edward Dean says you're just stirring up the hornet's nest here with the minorities.
He brings up a good point in terms of voter fraud. It's a myth. There is no voter fraud. There's no evidence of voter fraud. In Commonwealth Court, this was brought up. The state could not prove one single instance of in-person voter fraud. It's not there. The George W. Bush, his Justice Department, did a 10-year study nationwide to find instances of in-person voter fraud. And in 10 years, they could find exactly 10 cases. Not 10,000, but 10. So that's a 1 in 15 million chance of one instance of voter fraud. Your chance of getting struck by lightning is 1 in a million. So your chance of getting struck by lightning is higher than voter fraud.
So Edward Dean was wrong when she said that 100 people voted from their graves. In this
Prove it. I've never heard of that.
All right, let's go.